Isaias Afwerki, the long-standing leader of Eritrea, is a figure of both reverence and controversy. As the first president of Eritrea, Afwerki played a pivotal role in the country's hard-fought battle for independence from Ethiopia, earning him the status of a national hero. However, his tenure, which began in 1993, has since been marked by allegations of authoritarianism, human rights abuses, and severe repression. Under his rule, Eritrea has become one of the most secretive and militarized states in the world, often being dubbed as the North Korea of Africa. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the rise to power of Isaias Afwerki, the longtime ruler of Eritrea, and how he has managed to hold on to power for so long. Isaias Afwerki, the second eldest of 8 siblings, was born in Asmara, Eritrea in 1946. During Isaiah's childhood, his father spent much time in Tigray, Ethiopia, where he owned a coffee farm that the Derg later nationalized. With his father often absent, Isaias lived with his mother in a working-class neighborhood in eastern Asmara near the train depot and the Lutheran church. To make ends meet, his mother made and sold sewa, a traditional beer. Known for his assertiveness from a very young age, Isaias insisted on leading his neighborhood football teams and also claimed the best seat at home. The young boy attended primary school in Asmara and graduated from Prince Makonnen High School in 1965. By the time Isaias was born, Eritrea was under British control following the defeat of Italy and Germany in the Second World War. However, the British viewed the colony as an impractical burden and were eager to transfer its administration to the United Nations. Ethiopia, then under Emperor Haile Selassie I, was intent on controlling Eritrea to gain access to the Red Sea. Emperor Selassie, like his predecessors, believed that Ethiopia's landlocked status hindered its economic development and access to modern weaponry. This desire by the emperor often led to tensions as many Eritreans opposed Ethiopian annexation, leading to the formation of various rebel groups. The United Nations intervened, establishing a commission that recommended Eritrea be federated with Ethiopia but not directly controlled by it. In 1952, Eritrea became an autonomous unit within Ethiopia, theoretically maintaining a degree of self-rule. However, Emperor Selassie gradually eroded Eritrean autonomy, banning political parties and imposing Amharic as the language of instruction in Eritrean schools. In 1962, when Isaias Afwerki was 16 years old, Ethiopia formally annexed Eritrea, thus reducing it to a province and fulfilling Emperor Haile Selassie's ambition for a Red Sea coastline. After this annexation, Eritreans felt betrayed as their autonomy was dismantled and they were now relegated to being second-class citizens. This betrayal spurred the rise of the Eritrean Liberation Front, the EPLF, in 1961. Formed by Eritrean students and intellectuals in exile in Cairo, Egypt, the EPLF, primarily consisting of Muslim lowlanders, began targeting symbols of Ethiopian authority, marking the start of Eritrea's protracted struggle for independence. Young Isaias Afwerki attended university in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital, to study engineering. The university was a hotbed of political unrest, with many left-wing students vehemently protesting against Ethiopia's feudal conditions and calling for sweeping reforms. Caught up in the revolutionary fervor, Isaias Afwerki abandoned his studies after a year and traveled to Sudan to join the Eritrean Liberation Front that had now started conducting guerrilla raids against Ethiopian forces. This path that Isaias had taken was one that many Eritrean youths followed. Isaias quickly distinguished himself within the EPLF and in 1967 was selected to undergo military training in China. While in China, he immersed himself in Marxist ideologies and guerrilla warfare strategies. At Nanjing Military College in particular, Isaias Afwerki's studies ranged from theoretical lessons on mobilizing the masses forming a vanguard party and creating a people's army, to practical training on manufacturing explosives from local materials, laying landmines and demolishing bridges. This training in China was comprehensive, preparing Isaias for the multifaceted challenges of leading a revolutionary movement. Once he was back in Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki authored a manifesto titled Our Struggle and Its Goals, which became a seminal guiding document for the Eritrean Liberation Front. This manifesto laid out the ideological foundation and strategic objectives of the ELF, articulating the vision for Eritrea's fight for independence and self-determination. The Eritrean Liberation Movement was not without its internal strife marked by bitter civil war. The original movement, the ELF, was predominantly Muslim and drew its recruits from the lowlands. However, ideological and regional divisions soon emerged within this organization. A faction of Christian Highlanders, many of whom were young students, broke away, criticizing the ELF for its perceived narrow-mindedness, regionalism, and lack of ambition. Among some of the people who broke away from the ELF was Isaias Afwerki. He, along with like-minded comrades, established a new group that eventually merged with other splinter factions to form the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF. This newly formed Marxist-oriented movement, which 6 of Isaiah's siblings would later join, engaged in a fierce civil war with the ELF. Armed clashes between the two parties ensued, and the EPLF ultimately emerged victorious, driving the ELF into exile in Sudan by the early 1980s. The EPLF established itself as a principal resistance movement against Ethiopian rule with its base in Nakfa, Eritrea. Life for the EPLF in Nakfa was harsh, marked by constant bombardment from the Ethiopian Air Force. The EPLF fighters, about 30% of whom were female, lived underground. They built an underground hospital, laboratories, and schools for their children, conducting all their activities under the cover of night in order to avoid air raids. Isaias Afwerki would rise to prominence within the EPLF, becoming chairman of the military committee in 1975. It is said that his autocratic tendencies were evident early on. Challenges to his leadership were brutally suppressed. These so-called dissidents who had spoken up against Afwerki faced severe retribution. Despite his harsh methods, Isaias Afwerki was also respected within the EPLF. Many of his comrades during the time recall a man who was perpetually active, whether engaging in practical tasks like cooking, building shelters, or even immersing himself in study. It is said that Isaias often returned from trips with piles of books, urging fighters to read and setting up study groups to discuss socialist theory, the roots of Zionism, as well as international affairs. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia in 1974, a coup d'etat succeeded in overthrowing Emperor Haile Selassie. This coup was led by a group of idealistic young military officers known as the Derg. The Derg, with their Marxist and left-leaning ideology, dismantled the royal court and executed numerous former generals and ministers. They seized control of Ethiopia, declaring the need to modernize the country, which they perceived as being mired in feudalism. Driven by a nationalist agenda, the Derg adopted mottos like Ethiopia above all and aggressively sought to suppress dissent in Eritrea. The Derg often resorted to brutal tactics common in counterinsurgency operations, such as razing villages, slaughtering livestock, burning crops, and committing massacres against civilians. During this period, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, emerged in the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray, led by Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi and his TPLF allied with the EPLF as both movements opposed the Derg and Ethiopian rule from Addis Ababa. The Eritreans, with their greater experience, were the senior partners in this alliance. The EPLF took a small number of Tigrayans from the TPLF for military training and sent a handful of their members to teach the TPLF basic guerrilla warfare tactics. Also, Isaias Afwerki and Meles Zenawi reportedly lived together in North Mogadishu for a brief period where they were provided with Somali passports and a radio frequency to broadcast in Tigrinya and Arabic. Their combined efforts ultimately led to the fall of Mengistu Haile Mariam's regime in Ethiopia, with the TPLF forces marching triumphantly into Addis Ababa and installing a new government. Also, in May 1991, EPLF fighters marched into Asmara, bringing an end to the 30-year war for independence from Ethiopia. Much of the credit for this military and political victory was attributed to Isaias Afwerki, although the collective effort of the EPLF deserved recognition. Many Eritreans celebrated him for achieving a dream many had thought impossible in their lifetimes. After their victory, the EPLF rebranded itself as the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, the PFDJ, becoming Eritrea's sole political party. Although a multi-party constitution was widely debated and anticipated, it was never ratified or implemented. On May 24, 1993, Eritrea officially became an independent nation. Isaias Afwerki became the president of this new nation, leading it into a new era of sovereignty and self-determination. For a brief period in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the world embraced Isaias Afwerki's vision of himself as a progressive leader. He built hospitals, reforested Eritrea's barren slopes with millions of trees, and ensured effective distribution of food aid to a chronically malnourished population. Meanwhile, after Eritrea's independence, President Isaias Afwerki and Ethiopia's new leader, Meles Zenawi, maintained good relations. However, relations between the two men began to deteriorate. It is said that Meles Zenawi was always wary of Isaias Afwerki, whom he viewed as ruthless and volatile. At the same time, Isaias Afwerki was always suspicious of Meles Zenawi, and his suspicions peaked when he believed that Meles Zenawi attempted to kill him. In this instance, while returning from a vacation in Kenya, Isaias Afwerki, his family, and his inner entourage stopped in Addis Ababa, where Meles Zenawi offered them a flight back to Asmara on one of his aircraft. On the way to Asmara, the plane caught fire mid-flight but managed to return safely to Addis Ababa. Furious after this ordeal, Isaias Afwerki accused Meles Zenawi of trying to assassinate him and his family, leading to a permanent rift. At the same time, ideological differences between the two men further strained their relationship. The EPLF, as the older rebel movement of the two, often patronized the TPLF and its leader Meles Zenawi. These dynamics between Eritrea and Ethiopia took a deadly turn when a border dispute erupted into a full-scale war in 1998. A series of border incidents along the colonially demarcated boundary culminated in a clash in the village of Badme in May 1998 involving armed men from both sides. Historical grievances, economic factors, and national pride further fueled the hostilities, resulting in a devastating two-year conflict. Confident of victory, Eritrea's Isaias Afwerki failed to consult his generals on the ensuing military campaign, issuing instructions from his office hundreds of kilometers from the front. Tens of thousands of people died in the ensuing battles. The border war between Eritrea and Ethiopia concluded in 2000 with the Algiers Agreement, but by then, Ethiopian troops had seized large swathes of Eritrean territory. Eritrea essentially lost the border war, creating a crisis within Isaias Afwerki's regime. Many Eritreans felt the conflict was unnecessary and blamed Isaias Afwerki for his stubbornness and strategic missteps, accusing him of ignoring his generals and making key military decisions himself. This discontent led to open discussions in newspapers and the publication of the Berlin Manifesto by Eritrean intellectuals, calling out the failures of one-man rule and advocating for the implementation of Eritrea's constitution to allow a multi-party democracy. The border war's disastrous outcome for Eritrea brought long-suppressed criticisms to the surface, and key ministers of Isaias Afwerki formed the Group of 15, the G15, issuing an open letter condemning Isaias Afwerki's failure to implement democratic reforms. Former comrades openly referred to Isaias Afwerki as a dictator, and the independent media echoed these sentiments. For a brief moment, change seemed imminent in Eritrea. However, when the G15 cabinet ministers called for a meeting to discuss these issues, President Isaias Afwerki responded by having them arrested and imprisoned. These ministers have never been seen ever since, with many believed to have died in custody. This brutal suppression heralded a new phase of Isaias Afwerki's rule, marked by the shutdown of independent media, the suppression of dissenting churches and NGOs, and the silencing of the Orthodox Church and the Grand Mosque. Eritrea's parliament became a mere shadow, with no significant decisions being made. In a move reminiscent of Mao Zedong's anti-intelligentsia campaigns in China, Asmara's university was shut down and replaced with military-run technical colleges. The aftermath of the border war and the crackdown on the G15 cabinet ministers effectively marked the end of democracy in Eritrea. The most severe consequence of the border war in Eritrea was the introduction of indefinite military service. Starting in 2003, thousands of young Eritreans, both male and female, were conscripted into national service straight from secondary school. This system, likened to slavery by some, forced them to abandon their studies and family farms to undergo military training at Sawa, a harsh desert camp. Trained as soldiers, they were used as laborers, digging wells and building roads for meager state allowances. It has been reported by Human Rights Watch that this forced labor, which can last for years with no end in sight, has driven thousands of young Eritreans into exile each year. A report by Human Rights Watch adds that former conscripts have described working long hours for minimal food rations, primitive accommodation, and wages too low to sustain themselves, let alone their families. President Isaias Afwerki has defended this repressive system, arguing that the country must remain on a war footing due to its past conflict with Ethiopia. In the past, Afwerki's government has justified this system as a means to instill hard work and nationalism, and as a way to provide jobs for the youth in the absence of a functional economy. Besides the system of indefinite conscription, Afwerki's government in Eritrea is also known to impose severe restrictions on practicing religion other than those recognized or controlled by the government, including Sunni Islam, Ethiopian Orthodox, Catholicism, and Lutheranism. Violations by citizens are often punished with arrest. After the border war, Isaias Afwerki's relationship with Ethiopia was marked by deep animosity. The unresolved border disputes and the presence of Eritrean opposition groups in Ethiopia further strained relations. During this period, Eritrea faced increasing international isolation, with Isaias Afwerki's regime subjected to a myriad of sanctions and widespread criticism for human rights abuses and support for armed groups in the Horn of Africa. But in 2018, a dramatic shift occurred when Ethiopia's new Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed initiated peace efforts with Eritrea. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced Ethiopia's acceptance of the Algiers Agreement, which included ceding disputed territories to Eritrea. This reconciliation was a significant diplomatic breakthrough, earning both leaders international acclaim and the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for Abiy Ahmed. However, initial enthusiasm soon gave way to cautious engagement. Border crossings that were initially reopened were later closed again, reflecting lingering mistrust. The outbreak of the Tigray War in Ethiopia in late 2020 also added another layer of complexity. Eritrea's involvement in the conflict, siding with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian Federal Forces against the TPLF, drew international condemnation. following the Tigray War, and after numerous peacemaking efforts, Eritrean troops began withdrawing from the Tigray region in December 2022 as part of the peace agreement between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Initially celebrated as a hero for leading Eritrea to independence, Isaias Afwerki has maintained an iron grip on power for 31 years through a combination of strategic alliances, ruthless suppression of dissent, and deft manipulation of regional politics. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenta for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.